Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I am Teri Murray, Professor, Dean Emerita, and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at St. Louis University School of Nursing. I am also the co-chair for the Fellow Selection Committee for the 2022 application cycle. On behalf of the Academy's Fellow Selection Committee Chair, Debbie Chapman-Bryant, I am excited to have a dialogue with our speakers today. We have 3 speakers. So our speakers are Michael Bleich, Senior Professor and Director at the Langston Center for Innovation in Quality and Safety, Virginia Commonwealth University School of Nursing, and President and CEO of NursDynamics. Second speaker, Dorothy James, Professor Emerita and Director of the Marjory Program for Knowledge Development and Clinical Reasoning at Boston College, and Director Emerita and Senior Nurse Scientist at Massachusetts General Hospital, Yvonne Munn Center for Nursing Research. And the third speaker is Debra Toney, Vice President of Quality Management at Nevada Health Centers Incorporated and President of the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurses Association. So those are our 3 speakers today. As a policy, organization, and honorific society, the American Academy of Nursing welcomes diverse perspectives, experiences, and expertise. Together, we are transforming healthcare and propelling our policy priorities forward. Academy Fellows are inducted into the organization for their extraordinary contributions to improve health locally and globally. With more than 2,900 fellows, the Academy represents nursing's most accomplished leaders who work towards our mission to improve health and achieve health equity by impacting policy through nursing leadership, innovation, and science. Annually, the Academy receives hundreds of qualified applications, from stellar candidates seeking to become a fellow. I would like to recognize and thank all the fellows who provide sponsorship for these candidates. We recognize the time, effort, and care that goes into each sponsor statement and the dedication you put in to help shepherd your candidate through the fellowship application process. If you have not sponsored yet, I encourage you to consider sponsoring a candidate. As a reminder, fellows can sponsor 2 applicants per year. I realize many of you are likely already familiar with how the selection process works, but I thought it would be helpful if I provided a brief overview. The application cycle opens annually in mid to late January, and it closes in mid to late February. Prior to the application launch, candidates identify and work with their sponsors to prepare their statements and application materials. Our panelists today will provide more insight into the sponsor-applicant relationship. Prior to application review, the Fellow Selection Committee, which consists of elected and appointed members, are paired into teams of 2, which we call dyads. Each dyad is assigned applications to review individually, and they then meet with their dyad partner to discuss their scores and to try to reach a consensus on any variance in scores. Then the full committee comes together for a selection meeting where a robust discussion occurs about candidates and final decisions are made as to who will or will not be inducted into the Academy. Prior to the review, the committee members identify any conflicts of interest, attend an orientation session, as well as an unconscious bias training. This year, committee members will also participate in a mock application review and a training on international nursing. The applications consist of the applicant statements, question responses, and 2 sponsor statements, as well as the applicant CV. Now, let's hear from our speakers. Michael, can you start by discussing your experience as a sponsor and working with candidates to prepare to apply for fellowship? And you will have 10 minutes, and I'll try to give you the 1-minute warning.
I'm sure you will, Teri. Thank you for the kind introduction, and I appreciate your opening remarks. I've had the good fortune of sponsoring a good number of people, one of whom was an international applicant. And so it's fun to think back and reflect on that experience. First and foremost, I'd like to tip my hat to the sponsors who are on this call. I know most of the applicants will be using the information, but in my mind, there's no greater way to support the Academy than to take the time to sponsor candidates. And frankly, as you mentioned, Teri, too few serve the Academy in this way. Those who sponsor, if you think about it, are the future of the Academy's talent bank. They will serve, these new inductees will serve the Academy through expert panels. They'll become office holders, program planners, and more. So it's very, very significant that our sponsors serve the Academy by mentoring and supporting and encouraging their work. This leads to those of you on the call who are considering membership in the Academy. In our discipline, I think most would agree that there is no greater recognized honorific title than FAAN. Besides this honorific, however, your candidacy is about service to the mission and the aims of the Academy. It's not just an award for you to take and leave with, but rather it is an invitation to service. So I'm going to give 10 quick tips for success in preparing your application with that in mind. First tip, follow the directions for the application in an exacting manner. The selection committee has an onerous job to review applications. So standardization is key. It's not to drive you crazy. It really isn't. It really helps them. Which leads to number 2. Be honest about your readiness to apply. That's a gift to yourself and to your sponsor. Now, how will you know when you're ready? In a nutshell, you're ready when the efforts that you've made align with the Academy's work and there is evidence of dissemination and impact regionally, nationally, and internationally. And notice I didn't say state. Some states are very small, some states are very big. So where has your impact been felt? Thinking about it regionally is probably a more balanced way, a harmonized way to think about your readiness. The third point is you really need to gain a deep understanding of the Academy's mission in leadership, innovation, and science. Some people apply and they know the award part of it, but they don't necessarily understand the service part of it. So examine the strategic plan, the expert panels, the kind of policy work that the Academy supports. How do your contributions as you write your application overtly link to these initiatives? Fourth, hone the answers to the application questions. Yes, you will probably be frustrated by the word limitations, but in the end, frustration will become something you cherish because you will be focusing your own message about your contributions. Each question is different. And if you're not answering each question with a different perspective, you're missing the boat of the application. In the first question, you've got 100 words to state your contribution in some way that's very powerful. And the second part of that is really to provide the context of your efforts. Was it at your work setting? Was it in the political arena? Was it in a scientific laboratory? Was it in community organizing? Whatever it is, describe it so that the reviewers can value the context of your efforts. The third question is one I think that is probably the most difficult for people. And that is, what is your substantive, sustained, and outstanding impact of your effort? And what you plan to do with it in the future. Now, this impact statement is difficult for many for a couple of reasons. One, most of us talk about ourselves in the context of a team. And it's hard for us to say, well, this was a team effort. This wasn't my effort. Well, if it was, what was your role in the team's effort? Because that's what's being evaluated. It's not the impact of the team. So you have to kind of get used to talking about yourself, and you have to look at yourself through the lens of a team, or if it was a solo effort, that won't be as difficult. But it has to have impact. And so a lot of us do great things, but we don't take the time to think about, well, where's the evidence? Did someone use the clinical model that I developed? Was it disseminated? And if it was disseminated, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was used. A lot of things get published, but very few people, the uptake of those publications may not be substantive. So this is where people really need to take time to think about, how do I have evidence that someone has used the contribution that I've made and that it's having an impact? So that's why that is a difficult question. And it's something that, frankly, we move on in our lives and we don't take the time to go back and reflect on it. And then I think the last question is also very important. How do you plan to advance the mission of the Academy? We have a lot of members that may not make a lot of contributions once they're in. And this is a service organization as well as an honorific. It's honorific because of our contributions and our actions. So we need to keep those going. Number 5, have sponsors who deeply know you, your work, and ideally that complement their impressions of you through various lenses. This answers a question that's frequently asked: can I have both sponsors from my work? Yes, but it might be more valuable to strategically think about how they would verify and amplify your efforts if they are from the same place. So you want people that have differing perspectives that can present you holistically, if you will. Those sponsor statements are where a lot of embellishments can be made to your application. Number 6, in the past, applicants had to demonstrate their stated expertise beyond their job roles. Now, this was always a difficult and tricky question for people. And fortunately, it's no longer the case. Now, why isn't it the case? I've thought a lot about this, and it doesn't need to be the case because a lot of us hold positions that are where the majority of our work and efforts take place. But rather than the place being the focal point, it's what is the impact beyond the work setting. So you're still expected to talk about your impact and influence, as I mentioned earlier, through the context of work. Next, I'd like to talk for just a minute for those of you that have jobs that are broad-based. And I'm going to use the example of a chief nursing officer. And these are some of the people that I have supported in the past. CNOs over the course of time have a very broad, and they maybe have several areas of expertise in that. That may be different than a scientist who has a focused area of science that they evolve and develop over the course of time. Not to say that there aren't some scientists who also have a broad range of scientific expertise. If you're in a role that's broad-based like a CNO, select a contribution that is not the full range of your CV. The CV stands by itself. You still have to select the impact area that you have. So if that area is quality improvement or care delivery development or financial, or if there's a way to frame financial implications of a care model, select an area that is your area of expertise. Now, how do you discern that? My two pieces of advice would be to look at the impact factors. Where do you have the most evidence of dissemination, and how has that work been the uptake of that work? And then the second thing is, what best aligns with the academy purpose that you want to write about in your last question. Number 8, I think I can speak for every sponsor here, and I hear once in a while an exception of someone who whipped out an application, but rush jobs in completing the application is unfair to yourself, and it's unfair to your sponsor. It does take time, effort, and energy if it's done well. That said, I also believe to not prolong the application process, because you can lose energy along the way. So you want to do this in the time frame that the academy and the selection committee has advised.
And Michael, I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning.
I'm on 9 and 10. Number 9 is plan to have an organizing session with your sponsors to strategically build your case. And number 10, last but not least, is realize that not everybody's going to be successful. And don't be disarmed or angry about this. Sometimes it's a matter of writing with more focus. Sometimes it's a matter of sponsor statements or selecting sponsors who may not know you well enough. And sometimes it's because the impact was not fully measured. So don't be dissuaded, and also understand that sometimes individual excellence in a far-reaching discipline may better align with some other mechanisms to celebrate your achievements at this moment in time. So I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your top 10 tips. They were very helpful. So now I'm going to ask Dottie if she can share any insights to help our candidates, her perspective to help our candidates along the way.
Thank you, Teri, and thank you, Michael. Michael certainly has presented a broad base and a wide understanding of an approach to selection for the academy. I would reinforce some of his points and maybe make some additional comments moving forward. One thing I do think is the commitment that we talked a little bit about of the mentor, and the idea of, if you're new to the process, although you can take on 2, it may be something that you want to consider and think about one only for the first go round. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, but it also takes insight and support to support the mentor that you're, to the mentee, and to really get a handle on the work. And I'll give you an example to support what Michael said about, yes, you can have 2 people from the same institution, but I personally have found, and I've worked with many candidates, to explore options. For example, most recently, there was someone who selected a mentor who was in another state, but that mentor directly had a significant contribution to embellish not only her work as a clinician and a scholar, but also to add insight to the board of directors that she was just selected as a member to, and also provide real acknowledgement for the impact that that work that she had done had on a global network that really was the reason that she was selected for this appointment. So I think it's a dialogue between you and your mentor, for the applicant and for the mentor, to consider the options of strength of the application in selecting a second person. The second thing I wanted to talk about is creating a whole picture. The Academy application has selected areas for you to respond to, and those areas can be addressed according to the way the questions are asked. But it is up to the mentor to help the mentee, I believe, look at the work carefully and decide what is the it that you want to speak to. What is the contributions that you have made in so many ways that might be attributed to a role, might be attributed to a particular committee structure that you're a part of or developed, might be affected by grant funding, etc. And what is the topic in relation, again, to the strategic goals of the Academy, but also as you look at the body of work that you're submitting, has a real relationship to many dimensions that are answered through the questions. The second is language. And I say this because I think this is where I find one of the greatest problems. People may adopt to the fact that they take on the personalization of owning what they have accomplished directly. And so a lot of the statements begin, I have served as, I have had a project, I have been the leader of or principal investigator of a grant, I have done this. And it's constantly the repetition of sentence structure, when I think it's up to the mentor to help the mentee see word conservation and to look at a way of talking about your presentation that could potentially embody multiple areas that you're trying to address in a sentence. For example, if you've been a dean or you've worked as a CNO or you've had an opportunity to participate in funding for a long time, you may say something like, in the past 3 decades, I have been an innovative leader or a lead project investigator, and on a particular topic that has significantly impacted care delivery on a national and international level and led to the development and translation of these innovative ideas into care delivery. Something like that, rather than, I've read sentences that might break all of that into 1, 2, 3 sentences. The word repetition increases your word count, and you're looking to streamline that word count. And if you can think very carefully of words that might kind of go together. I have designed, collaborated, implemented unit-based care around pain management, around wound care, around any project you're talking about that has had an upstream impact on the national health related to this particular problem. Rather than multiple sentences to say that, you look at word conservation, where you can get as many words as you have related to a topic and avoid redundancy and also keep the word count down. My third area is also talking about impact. And I wanted to broaden that a little bit more to talk about that with the context of healthcare equity, access, and serving populations broad-based. And in addition to that impact is, as Michael said, sustainability. You're a leader. The leader has a reputation that has been facilitated by innovation, by research, by translation of results on a national, international forum. If you are the first person who has done that, and years ago when the Academy first was instituted, you had to be the first in everything. But if you were the first to develop an innovative program that has been translated and replicated nationally and internationally, say that. And if you can, identify places where that has taken place. But I think that that impact in terms of talking about care design and how it has changed practice, how it has implemented policy, how it has a fiscal outcome related to the intervention is really important to highlight. I also think that talking about your work as having a broad impact in relation to your appointments to committees, national committees, committees where you have taken the lead as the project manager, committees where you have been placed on board of the directors, and what your role has in terms of really creating the impact of that appointment to reflect the work of your scholarship and the areas that you're identifying. People talk about multiple pieces of research. I did this, I did that, I did the next thing. If you're talking about research, one thing that I think is really important is to talk about a program of research. Many scholars have been working on a topic or expanded that topic for a long period of time. Talking about conducting multi-site studies, talking about research that has had impact on sites over countries and distributions in places is really important. Talking about the research and the program of research that you've developed and talking about the results that have led to changes, have communicated care in a different way, have resulted in improved patient outcomes, have talked about new innovations that have streamlined processes and improved the care of a population or a community or a family is most important. I think also thinking about the impact in relation to a statement under that question where it's asking you about your impact. Many people start that off in a different way. One's suggestion might be to talk about my most significant contributions have been focusing on translation of nursing research or federally funded nursing research initiatives that focus on things like pain management, improvement in symptom distress, looking at improvement in wound care, changing some dynamic on a national or international level that you're focused on. And as a result of this work, I've had publications, I've had appointments, I've been recognized with awards, I've been put in a position where I am chair of a committee and have led this initiative. Also, the results of your work, changing standards of care, having a policy impact, allowing you to collaborate with more groups internationally to improve care for the greater good of the larger number of people. The other thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is your CV. Thinking about your curriculum vitae and having your curriculum vitae align with the story that you're telling about your impact and the work that you have done is critically important. If you're providing evidence around research, around appointments, if you're talking about your leadership of committee, make sure that that information is in your documents. If you are reporting on publications and you want to talk about the impact factor of your implications, make sure you put that information in the CV, because it's the only other thing that's truly available to people as they look at your material. And so if you say that you've disseminated internationally, make sure that that is reflected in your work, in your presentations, that it's these sites and collective groups that you've disseminated information to are represented. If it has to do with a book that you've published and the book represents definitive work in a certain area, make sure that that is clearly identified in your CV. If you've provided innovation and have been sponsored or supported by groups that really facilitate your innovation locally as well as nationally, regionally. Talk again about that, make sure that that work is reflected. So think about everything that you're writing the story about in terms of why you are a candidate to be selected for the Academy, and make sure that what's in the documents that you're writing about and how you're giving those examples are evidenced in the CV. And sometimes I have found that it requires you rewriting your CV. And a lot of the people that apply who are part of an academic community seem to have that more readily available to them because of the formatting that's provided by your institution. However, there are people that don't have those guidelines, and you really have to provide structure and design that would follow a logical introduction of the candidate and a development of what they've been recognized for, and a good picture of the work around research, around their practice, around their leadership, as well as their appointments.
So, and Donnie, I'm going to actually wrap it up in a minute.
Okay. The other thing I would reinforce is your contribution of your work to the work of the Academy. And again, as Michael suggested, reading the strategic goals of the Academy, as well as the what the expert panel stands for. And again, be a contributor and see this as your opportunity to bring your lifelong work into focus to support changes in policy internationally for the betterment of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dottie. I love the what is it that you talked about, like distilling down your information to what is it, the word conservation, and then finally the evidence that it has to be throughout the document. So thank you very much for those insights. And now we are going to go to Debra, and she is going to share her insights about the application process. Debra.
Yes, thank you. Dottie and Michael did an excellent job, so I'm going to do my best not to repeat anything that they have said. So mine may sound just a little bit different, but I'm going to actually start out with some of the questions or concerns that I've actually had from individuals. I've sponsored several individuals into the Academy, as well as has been a member of the selection committee. So what I'd like to say starting out is that you determine whether or not you're ready. That actually comes up frequently. You know, do you think I'm ready? I don't know who I should ask. So there are some tools and things on the website that you can take a look at, and it kind of gives you some pretty tough questions to evaluate yourself. But I'm going to say you need to do that and make some determination. The other thing, like we're in the middle of December, if you are hoping or planning to apply for the Academy, I'm going to say, I hope you have your sponsors. You want to start finding out who knows your work. You want to select that early. You don't want to wait to the last minute. I've had people say, Debra, can you believe someone asked me to sponsor them 2 weeks before the application was due? So that's not really fair for yourself, nor is it fair for the persons that you're asking to sponsor you. So you want to make sure that you have enough time to pull everything together. Remember, your sponsors are your reference. No one will be going back, Googling you up and looking for a lot of work and trying to verify what you say in your application. Michael said something and I'm gonna have to repeat this one, read the instructions. You have to read the instructions so that you'll actually know what it is you're doing. When we talk about the association to your job, I came in at a time where it had to be very clear that it was not job related. I'm in the practice arena, so practice, I'm going to just be real straight out with it. Sometimes it's a little more challenging to try to figure out how to pull your application together. And I'm going to also say you want to look at sponsors who I would say know your work, but also have some expertise in that area so that they can help you tease that out. As Michael had mentioned, as far as your job, usually you're working in teams, but the whole point is what was your role in that particular project that you created. A lot of us are used to CVs. I've seen CVs that are 50 pages. I'm like, no one wants to read a 50-page CV. So you need to really narrow that down. That again goes back to looking at the instructions because there's some very clear guidance on what that should look like, especially the academics. They've done a lot of stuff. So you really make sure that you're looking at your resumes, your CVs, and cutting those down where it's really pertinent to what you are really your biggest contributions to nursing. As far as impact, I always focus a lot on impact. What has been the impact of your work? Are you talking to just a little small group of people, or have you made a large national impact? Have you influenced policy? And always remember that the Academy is a policy organization. So how does your work fit in with the work of the Academy? There is, we do know, an honorific component to it. Everybody wants to see that FAAN behind their name, but it's a little bit more than that. Actually, it's a lot more to it than that. I always tell people you don't have to wait till the end of your career to apply to be in the Academy. You need a body of work. That's going to be one of the first things I always ask is, what is your body of work? Who knows that body of work? There are also individuals who may be in small, I'm going to say organizations or from smaller locations or states. And I've had those kind of questions. Well, Debra, I don't know anybody in the Academy. I don't know who I could get to sponsor me. Then to that question, I say you need to broaden your horizon. Maybe you need to attend an Academy meeting so you can really get a chance to meet people and hobnob and broaden your horizons and get a chance to know what the organization is all about. Is it really an organization you want to be involved in? The application process is a time to toot your own horn, which is really difficult, I know, for people to do. It's hard to talk about yourself. And some of my sponsees that I've sponsored, I'll say, this is your time to walk on water. You need to dig deep and think about the impact that your work has made on the world, really, on your area, but not just locally. You didn't hear us just say locally, but how are you talking about from a regional and from a national perspective? Because the Academy does expect you to continue to do this great work. It's not just get into the Academy and then you just kind of sit down and not do any further work. So those are some of the things that I wanted to share when it comes to sponsorship. I want to just kind of, Teri, leave time for questions. I feel that Dottie and Michael did a great job from an overall perspective on what to expect.
Thank you so much, Debra, for sharing your unique insights. They have been helpful. And those are the questions that come up an awful lot about what should I do and how should I coordinate this with my sponsor. So now we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So there's one question about whether or not the sponsors are blinded. Like, do we know who the sponsors are? And as of last year, what we receive on the fellow selection committee are the sponsor statements. The name of the sponsor and their contact information is blinded to the fellow selection committee. So no, we do not know who served as your sponsor. So that was one question that I saw repeatedly. It came up in the chat as well as the question answer session. So one question that I have for you is, and any of the panel members can answer it. If you have not made a national or international impact, are you not eligible? And the other question following that, is a local, regional, state impact not enough? Or is it enough?
I think local is probably not enough. I'd love to hear what Dottie and Debra have to say about that. But I think at the state level, three of the people that I've sponsored had their major contributions to state level policy that ended up being a prototype for national policy. So I don't think, and again, I say regional because a state like Rhode Island is very different than a state like California. And so I think that it's not about the state per se, the geography of it's about where have you had influence. And it might be, and I think Dottie made an important point, and I really want to, of course, always tip my hat to her anyway, but it could be about having an impact on a population. And I think we think more geographically, whereas I think she has suggested that maybe it's a particular kind of clinical population, or maybe it's a family dynamic. And so it might be that we look at influence within other associations, which again is a unique way of thinking about yourself. And to me, that's what the challenge is.
Thank you.
I would agree with Michael, but I think that I would agree that probably not the local level. You know, years ago, people entered the academy and they were people who were quite seasoned. They had been in their practice, in their arena of care, or in their teaching role for many years. They had many opportunities to achieve a lot of things. We have younger people moving into the academy who equally have done great things. I think the whole idea of the academy, since the role of the academy is focusing on policy, and policy requires a collection, if you will, of work that gives evidence to changing policy, and nursing is looking for a voice that will do that. I think that the work needs to be disseminated. It could begin at a local level, but if you are writing about your work and someone picks up that work from another country, I know several people have done the work locally. They have over time had some national and international recognition, but mostly it was the nature of their work at sites that other people said, I read your article, can we work with you? Can I translate what you've done into a standard for care at my institution? The work was not only disseminated, it was used and it had an impact. So if you were thinking about changing policy related to a standard or taking a position on something, you had more than just one person and articles by that one person, but you're thinking of a collective network that can reinforce that work that you probably influence through your innovation, through your funding, through your collaborative interests with other groups. And a lot of times groups go on and they form teams and they write together, and there's this collective that's really moving forward. But the link is you started this work, you moved it forward, you got other people interested in moving that forward to work with you because they see you as the leader, and they have changed their role, they have changed their practice, they have gone on and made a difference. I would say doing work in a very insular way in an institution and it hasn't gone anywhere, I don't think that probably would be challenging enough. And I do think that the whole idea of this is to really move towards changing the way care is delivered broadly. And so the impact becomes critical.
The piece that I would add to that when we say local, no, I don't agree that local is enough. But what I will say is that all politics start local. So our local politicians are in our cities and in our states, but then how do you move that to the next level when you're really passionate about something? We all have congressional people who live in our states and in our cities, but guess what? They move up to that national level. So how do you work with them on both fronts and then make that become a national impact? How do you do that? Are you working with them on particular policies, changes? I always suggest people when I'm speaking and you're talking about politics, again, invite them to come out and see your work. How can you get them on board? Because you are the expert when it really comes to policy and some of those type of things that you're trying to move it. But it definitely needs to be, much broader and moving, I'm going to say, all the way up to a national level.
But isn't that the sign of leadership too? If somebody
Absolutely.
starts local and then moves their work
Absolutely.
forward, that to me is testimony to
Absolutely.
that attribute.
So there was a question that was centered around whether or not their work has not been translated into policy yet. Would that count? What are your thoughts on that? So they've done some work, but it hasn't translated over into policy. I guess it's in process. So I think their point is like the significance of the impact. So can one or all three of you speak to the significance of the impact of that work? If it's just beginning and not maybe at full fruition where this work is in policies and widely
Teri,
disseminated.
somebody, and I can't remember if it was Michael or if it was Dorothy, when you start making that work and the connection, and it's not so much I'm going to say the final end of it but it's the influence. You've influenced policymakers, you've educated policymakers on different bills and those type of things. So I think sometimes it's not just that hard legislation that's come out that you want to, that you need to see in the end, but the journey is also, to me, critical and important.
I think building on Debra's comment there, policy can be implemented at an institutional level and an association level. It isn't always, we're talking not just about the political arena. A lot of our scientists may influence cardiac care. And so I think that thinking about policy, remember that a lot of the work of the expert panels is to put out policy recommendations or suggestions or help educate the clinicians and other people so that we think about it through the policy lens. But I think and the Academy does do a lot with state and federal governments, don't get me wrong, but that's not the only vehicle for policy work. So it can be at the institution or association, and it can influence policy through, again, work through the expert panels. So there are a number of venues to think about this through.
I also think that this whole idea of impacting policy has its roots in different directions. For example, you could affect standards of care. You could affect outcomes related to delivery models. You could redesign care and evaluate its effectiveness. You could, and that might have a change that is part of a network of care delivery, for example, and you publish it. And then other people pick up that publication and they want to follow up on what you did. How did you do it? How did you go about it? Again, it's as was said earlier, it's building this work to be ready for. And it doesn't mean that you have had to change the world overnight, but it does speak to your research and how a program evolved. It does speak to your ability to translate and innovate. It speaks to your ability to disseminate and to collaborate. And so the attributes of an Academy Fellow come through in your journey. And as you talk about those things, you know, you start somewhere and you had an idea and it flourished into change, and that change became bigger and bigger. And again, it's this collective readiness maybe that then can influence policy change at a higher level. But it doesn't always mean legislative. The other thing I think I have found too is many times the applicant has done this work, and it may have been local work, but it has been recognized by their participation in specialty groups or other committee structures or academies or whatever. And they have recognized that work and want these people on that panel or that board or that committee because of what they've done, so that their work can influence the work of an organization. So there are many ways to interpret that influence in terms of policy and change. And it may not always be, you know, the big bang that the academy is making, but your contributions to a committee can help the academy make that as well.
Well, and
Well, I also think that's where it's important, you know, when you're selecting your sponsors, you know, selecting a sponsor that knows your work. If the sponsor doesn't know your work, they're going to have a hard time supporting you. Remember, they are your reference. They are the ones that can help guide you through all those things that Dottie just talked about. It may start out locally, but now you've joined these national associations and you're doing the work there. It's been moved, you know, you're moving it up. So selecting a sponsor that knows you and your work is critical.
Very good. So we do have lots of questions, but one that comes across as my career has crossed over between community, academy, and practice. So how does that get synthesized in an application? The question is, should I try to synthesize these three areas into one?
The areas that have the largest impact. We can't put everything in the application. Michael mentioned there's a word count. You're gonna have to narrow that thing down real tight as far as the work that you have done. So you may want to take a look at that. And if you look at the application, it tells you what, you know, ask you about your contribution. So you will have to make some tough decisions. And again, your sponsor. And I've had to do that with some of my people that I sponsored. They want to put everything. I said, you cannot. You've got to make a choice, a decision on which ones do you think are the most impactful.
Well, and I would like to build on that again, my tag team here with Debra today. But I like the idea of this is where, what is your impact area? What is your significant contribution? And the fact that you've applied it in 3 domains, this is why having a strategic sponsor, maybe one from academia or one from the community, will triangulate that impact so that it's not a matter of thinking about it in separate chunks. It's about thinking, what is my focus? What is my contribution? Where did it unfold and where did I have impact? And then I should select sponsors that can speak to that in their response. And now you are able to say, as a sponsor, when Debra says she did, you know, fed all the children in a state, I can say, I saw her do this academically. I saw her do this through association work. I saw her do this. That's where that can come in.
I think that's really important. And again, it's the language that you're using, and the language and the sentence structure, I can't tell you enough, is so critical. Because if you, and the requirement really that you're talking about as well of a good sponsor, because I think with the sponsor can help you synthesize sentences and speak to, you know, rather than saying, well, I'm just doing research on this one topic. No, what did you collaborate with? Who did, you know, what were the populations you were looking to affect? What was the impact that you've had on your research, and how did you build on that? How did that information really impact maybe or potentially impact outcomes of care? What is the evidence that you're creating that can be used and translated? So I think, you know, those sentence structures that use attributes that you have as an applicant, a collaborator, a coordinator, a leader, an innovator, a change agent, someone who is redesigned, creative approaches, all of that terminology, to think about that as you're thinking about, this is the broad area that really speaks to my work, and it has a wide impact on multiple areas, and my language then can convert that into good sentences that communicate that. And again, the people can look at your CV and say, who were they collaborating with? What did they disseminate? What was the evidence that they really saw that was productive in affiliating with groups and changing care?
So thank you very much, Dottie. We are really coming to the end of our hour. There's lots of questions. So what I can encourage everyone to do is to make sure they read the application thoroughly. A lot of people have asked about how I know what question number 1 means. How can I differentiate it from question number 2? It really is in that application packet. So I encourage you to read that carefully. There's also a self-assessment on the website. And for the questions that have to do with how do I know if I'm ready, please do the self-assessment. It really makes you think about where you are in that process. And it can, and working with a sponsor, that person can help you decide where you are in that process. So lastly, I'd like to say, I hope everyone found this dialogue helpful. I would love to thank our 3 speakers. They have really given us a lot of insight. I'm honored to represent the Fellow Selection Committee on this call, especially since I'm going to be the incoming co-chair. The diverse expertise and professionalism of the selection committee members, it really is outstanding, and their time and commitment is a valuable resource to the Academy. Someone did ask about additional training for a mock review. That mock review is through the committee members, the fellow selection committee members. That has nothing to do with the applicants. So I'm sorry if that was some confusion, but I did want to clarify that. So a recording of this presentation will be available by the end of the week. And please visit www.aanet.org for more information, because it will be on our website, and some of the questions posed would be answered in the application process. So again, thanks to our speakers. Any last words? Dottie, Michael, and Debra?
My only last word would be to really lean on your sponsor, that they've gone through it before, they've done an application. Do not try to do it on your own.
I would say stay humble and focused in the process. You must talk about yourself. I think that's been said a couple of different ways. Get over it and get used to it, because during this process, it is critical. And don't rush, give it enough time, but keep the energy going.
Thank you,
I would just
Michael.
say that, I would just say people say that it's the most difficult thing they've ever done, and that they never realized that the questions required the amount of thinking and reflection, and that when they're finished and they get the letter saying that they have been accepted and that they will be a fellow, it's one of the proudest moments they've had.
Thank you. Well, this concludes our presentation, and thank you. We have several hundred participants here, so thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.